Okay, welcome everyone. For the session is ArcGIS Enterprise, and we've got two special guests, one local, one not so. So I'd like to introduce Philip Heedy from Esri and Bodavane from Eagle. Over to you guys.
All right. Thank you, Andrew. For any questions you may have here during the session, please scan this QR code for Slido right now, have it ready, start typing those questions in. We'll try to make time at the very end of the session to answer as many of those questions as we can, but we're also told that we need to get out of the room as soon as the session ends. So please don't wait until the last minute to put your questions in. As Andrew said, we're here to talk about ArcGIS Enterprise. How many of you have been to any of the conferences in the United States, either San Diego or Palm Springs? Has anybody ever been to a session that I've done? See, those of you that you know what I'm about to do. I'm about to make you raise your hands even more. How many of you were here for the previous session in here with Jess and Carol for ArcGIS Online? Excellent. Because, of course, ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise has a lot of similarities, right? They're very closely related products, and we'll talk a little bit about that here at the beginning. Oh, I had another Slido QR code. Very big.
It's bigger. It's bigger, this one. For
it's a bigger one.
If you couldn't catch it before.
But I'll start off with just a little bit of level setting, talking about ArcGIS Enterprise in the context of the broader ArcGIS platform. I'll talk about that relationship between ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise. Then I'll talk a little bit more about the different server roles, the additional capabilities that you can add to ArcGIS Enterprise. And then I'll turn it over to Bodavane to talk about what's new with ArcGIS Enterprise. And when we say what's new, it's going to be what's new in the last year or so 11.2, 11.3. We'll look at the different aspects of ArcGIS Enterprise, both the administrative aspects as well as the end-user facing pieces, the applications that your users are using on a daily basis. And then finally, at the end, we'll talk a little bit about ArcGIS Enterprise on Kubernetes. So that's a packed agenda. We could spend far more than 75 minutes in total, but we'll try to keep it to about 1 hour to have time for those questions at the very end. But again, I promised that I was going to try to make you raise your hands. How many of you are not already using ArcGIS Enterprise within your organizations? Show of hands. Oh, a few. Welcome. Excellent. I'm glad we made the choice to talk about what is ArcGIS Enterprise. For those of you who are using ArcGIS Enterprise, are you using the latest version, ArcGIS Enterprise 11.3? This is an overachieving crowd. Very good. 11.2 or 11.1? Okay. 11.0, 11.0? 10.9.1? Oh, some very enthusiastic 10.9.1 users. Okay. So when we are talking about what's new, again, we're talking about it from the perspective of the past year, but if you're coming from even older versions, you'll have even more things to brush up on. We have lots of great material, what's new, blogs, documentation. So you don't have to just take what we talk about here today. You can continue your education when you go back home. All right, so without further ado, I'll talk a little bit about what is ArcGIS Enterprise and try to put it in the context of the broader ArcGIS platform. This is our 30-second pitch. ArcGIS Enterprise is the foundational system for GIS. It's highly flexible to meet customer needs, whatever those are, both in terms of how to deploy it, but also how it can be used by the end users within your organizations. The key part, the key definition of ArcGIS Enterprise to highlight here is what's in the lower right-hand corner. It's self-hosted software, meaning you or someone on your behalf is going to take software that you're getting from us, from Eagle and Esri, and then run it in the environment of your choice, as opposed to ArcGIS Online, which is software as a service. Somebody has to take the software, install it, run it, maintain it, and so forth. Very often, and even here during this conference, and I won't name anybody by name, but I hear ArcGIS Enterprise being described as on-premises software. It's not wrong as such, but ArcGIS Enterprise can run anywhere you can run software. It doesn't have to be in a literal machine sitting on underneath somebody's desk in an office. Hopefully that's not the case. It can be that. It can be in a data center. It can be in the cloud. And I really want to emphasize that just because it's a very common misconception that ArcGIS Online is cloud, ArcGIS Enterprise is on-premises software. That's not inherently true. ArcGIS Enterprise can absolutely run in a cloud environment as well, whether it's public cloud like AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, any of those will work. It can also be private cloud environments. Sometimes private cloud is a fancy term for somebody's data center, or it is truly a data center with cloud-like capabilities. Regardless, ArcGIS Enterprise runs in any of those. Now, when we look at today's ArcGIS geospatial platform, this is a stylistic, simplified view of it. And you'll notice that ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise sit very much there in the middle of everything. All of those great applications that you've seen on stage both today and yesterday, they run on top of or as part of ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise. The web applications are quite literally built into Online and Enterprise. The mobile applications like field maps and Survey 123 and so forth, they connect to and are powered by ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise. ArcGIS Pro stands out as what I like to lovingly say is first among equals. From a certain perspective, it's just another application that works with ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise, but it also serves as a very special application that has a fairly unique place in the grand scheme of things. Now, what I'll focus on is that middle part, and specifically ArcGIS Enterprise. If you saw the previous presentation, you saw a lot of really great demos and walkthroughs of the different web applications, and the vast majority of those are also part of ArcGIS Enterprise. In fact, here during the break, we were talking about how we could almost split these different sessions out into 3 sessions. An online-specific one, an enterprise-specific one, and one focused on the things that are common. A lot of those web applications really are common to both, and the nuance comes down to what version are you running with ArcGIS Enterprise versus in ArcGIS Online, you're always using the latest and greatest. You can't not be using the latest and greatest. So when we look at ArcGIS Enterprise, we can't get around the need to talk about versions. Like I mentioned, we're going to be focusing on the past year's worth of releases. So that's ArcGIS Enterprise 11.2, which came out back in November of 2023, and more recently ArcGIS Enterprise 11.3, which came out here earlier. I almost said this summer, but that doesn't work down here. That's
the other way around.
Earlier this year. Windows and Linux versions of ArcGIS Enterprise typically come out about 3 to 4 weeks before the Kubernetes version then comes out about 1 month later. So I talked about this a little bit already, but I want to dive a little bit deeper into it. ArcGIS Enterprise is self-hosted software that you control, right? That means you, somebody in your organization, or somebody on your behalf, like Eagle as a managed service, other business partners, is running it on your behalf potentially. You can run it on Windows and Linux or Kubernetes, very traditional ways, or more modern cloud-native ways. I talked about how it can be on-premises. It can be physical hardware. Anybody still use physical hardware? See a few? Virtual machines, private clouds, public clouds. It is often used within the firewall, but doesn't inherently have to be. It can be on the public intranet. So you can run ArcGIS Enterprise in pretty much any way you want. It can be connected or disconnected, and you might think that's a strange way of talking about it. When we say disconnected, we typically mean disconnected from the open internet, running on your own isolated network. You can set it up for high availability. You have a lot of flexibility in terms of how to architect things, and you can scale it out, up and down and out for different workloads and different needs. That's very much the IT professional's view of ArcGIS Enterprise. That's one perspective, but the one that is often talked much more about when we're demonstrating things on stage is, of course, the end user's view, the GIS professional that is actually using ArcGIS Enterprise to get some kind of job done. I like to joke that nobody wakes up in the morning and thinks, man, I would like to get some ArcGIS Enterprise to install on some machines somewhere. Most of you presumably had a problem to solve, and hopefully ArcGIS Enterprise, in this case, is a mechanism to solve those problems. So from that end user GIS professional's perspective, ArcGIS Enterprise is experienced as a series of applications, often web applications, but also mobile applications, and as the foundation from which something like ArcGIS Pro can be used to both consume content, but also create content. It's where you're visualizing data, it's where you're analyzing data, it's where you're doing your work to actually solve those problems. As you're working within ArcGIS Enterprise as a GIS professional of some kind, you can be working with your own data that hasn't been shared with anybody else. It's just yours, all the way over the spectrum of how you make it available to the rest of your organization. Maybe you share it with individuals, groups of individuals, shared with the entire organization, or quote unquote shared with everyone. This is an interesting one, and I kept this slide in here because in the world of ArcGIS Online, when we say shared with everyone, we really mean pretty much everyone. Everyone is everyone on the open internet, which is more or less the globe. With ArcGIS Enterprise, shared with everyone means everyone who has access to this particular instance of Enterprise on this network. Maybe that's the internet, maybe that's your internal network, maybe it's people who have VPN access. There's more nuance to it that depends on how your organization decided to make ArcGIS Enterprise available or not. But when we go yet back one step to those IT professionals, it's a very different view. For the people, and I'm guessing that some of you are in this category, are running ArcGIS Enterprise. You're responsible for architecting it, setting it up, and maintaining it. You may or may not be all that interested in the problems that the end users are trying to solve with it. Your job is to understand the bits and pieces, the components of ArcGIS Enterprise, get them installed in the best possible fashion, connect them up, make sure that the system is available, resilient, reliable, and all those different things. So you may think in terms of individual software components. You may know that there's such a thing as called the ArcGIS Web Adapter, an ArcGIS Data Store, an ArcGIS Server, and a portal. Portal for ArcGIS, what is the difference? Oh, it gets fun. You're thinking in a completely different way and for a completely different purpose than those end users. So I point that out simply to acknowledge that we very often in conversation assume a certain persona, and it's very important in my mind to make sure that we are all aligned. This is not a view of ArcGIS Enterprise that I would ever present to an end user. Why would they care what components go into setting up the system? They care to the extent that it affects whether they can do their work or not. Switching gears just a little bit, then going back to this idea of ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise being very similar, something we've seen over the past several years is that a majority of customers these days actually use both. And they're typically used for different purposes. Sometimes online is about public sharing, enterprise is about internal work, but there's lots of different variations of that. We've done a lot of work over the past many years now also to build technology to make it easier to work between the two systems. So if you haven't heard of this before, I'm not going to go too deep into it here, but I did want to just make sure that you were aware of some of these capabilities to use what we call distributed collaboration, which is technology to make sure that you can take not just data and content, but even applications and share them between systems. Whether it's about sharing between ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise, between different ArcGIS enterprises, or a combination of all of that. It's very powerful technology to solve one of the more challenging problems in this space, which is how do I make sure that somebody who's sitting over there in a different system has access to the same data and the same applications that I've created in mine. And then finally, yet another perspective on ArcGIS Enterprise is the developer perspective. Somebody who's building new custom applications, whether they're custom web applications, custom mobile applications, or even custom desktop applications. They see ArcGIS Enterprise as a collection of REST services, REST APIs, for managing things like users and content. That's what we refer to as the sharing API. Going back to that concept of is it shared with anybody, those are the APIs there. The services APIs, this is where I can send a request to do geocoding. There's a geocoding service API. Or simply administrative APIs for managing the system itself. I want to add another server, and I want to script that or automate that so I don't have to manually go and click buttons. Somebody's written a script to do something, maybe. It's about extending ArcGIS Enterprise with additional capabilities. And then there's the higher level APIs and SDKs that Esri's built to simplify much of this work. Most people don't wake up in the morning and write raw JSON to put into a REST API. They use the ArcGIS Maps SDK for JavaScript to create a web application. Because as it turns out, creating good map controls is really hard, and we've already written one for you. So the end user perspective, the IT professional perspective, and the developer's perspective are all equally true and correct ways of looking at the system and the software. It all depends on what you're trying to do and why. All right, that was very abstract in a certain sense, but hopefully useful in terms of thinking of the system and the software. One of the things that I mentioned at the beginning was that ArcGIS Enterprise is very versatile. It has a lot of functionality just built into ArcGIS Enterprise itself. When you get Enterprise, it does mapping, it does visualization, it does analysis. But we have even more functionality that can be added onto the system as you so desire. More recently, we added ArcGIS Knowledge which comes in the form of an ArcGIS Knowledge server. This is about those geospatial knowledge graphs that I mentioned briefly yesterday as well. We've got Video Server, which is about oriented imagery in the form of video. Right now, you have a live video feed potentially, and being able to disseminate that out to a multitude of different clients. We've got ArcGIS Mission for mission management. We've got ArcGIS Notebooks for scripting, data science type workflows. We've got Workflow Manager for being able to orchestrate a repeatable process of steps and jobs. We've got Geo Event Server for real-time data ingestion and reacting to that data. And then, of course, we've got ArcGIS Image Server, which is about both managing imagery, disseminating imagery, and performing analysis against imagery. And we wanted to actually take a little time out and do a demo of Image Server to show some of the things you can do. So, Bedouin.
Thank you. Yeah, we wanted to highlight some of those capabilities that are only available to ArcGIS Enterprise, but also through one of those server roles in how you can extend your ArcGIS Enterprise. So what we're looking at now is the portal of ArcGIS Enterprise, and we can see that there are data stores. And those are data stores that we as a user, if you have the right privileges, can create. Simply by going to a new item, we have the data store option. And if we click on that, we can see that there's 3 options. We can connect to a folder, we can connect to a database, or we can connect to a cloud storage. So in this case, let's talk about cloud, as we're talking about imagery, and we see more and more of that imagery actually being stored onto the cloud. We do that, we can see the providers that we can connect to. In this case, we've got an AWS S3 connection. We can connect to it, we give it all of our details, and then we can connect to this actual data store. How we can use this with ArcGIS image server is actually quite interesting. So again, once you've got image server installed, you get the option to create an imagery layer. And that imagery layer can be created by just uploading some imagery, and it will create a hosted imagery layer, or we can connect to imagery stored somewhere already without pulling it down. If we want to do that, the latter, we can create an image collection. We can also choose one of the other ones, and ArcGIS Enterprise will actually create a hosted imagery layer for that. So when we choose the image collection, we have the option to just upload some imagery that we have on our desktop or laptop, or we can connect to the cloud store. And you can see I've got quite a few here registered. And what this does is it uses those cloud stores that are shared with me that I have access to, and it will reach out using my credentials to find the information that is sitting in that location. And it should pop up in a second or two. And what we can see is, I've shown some of the Huntley imagery before, and there's actually just one TIFF that we can select. We can set some properties. This is in Web Mercator, but if we want to have it in the New Zealand Transverse Mercator, I can just do, it will automatically transform on the fly. Next, it is just giving it some details. Hit go, and what it will do for me is it will create an image layer. That's the image layer that you can see over here, and in ArcGIS Enterprise you can actually do some image management on it as well. So in the properties I actually selected that I wanted to create overviews, but you can build the footprints as well, and you can do some other image management tasks here as well. We can then add it to a map. From here we can just use it as a background. We can use it for analysis as well. So for example, we can use deep learning to find the land cover using the Living Atlas item that I showed before. We can start extracting objects from it. On deep learning, there's also a tool that you get, an application that you get that is focused on doing deep learning. And then the whole workflow from labeling, training to actually inferencing. And that is Deep Learning Studio. So it gives you the options to prepare your training data, train your model, run an inference, and it will do that all in a very easy to use interface where you can actually work as a team to do that hardest part of deep learning if you have to, and that is labeling all the data. So that is some of the functionality and capabilities that you get with ArcGIS Enterprise that differentiates it from online, but also the extended capabilities of image server.
Yeah. All right, thank you. And I want to seize on that piece just a little bit because I didn't really talk about that before, but it's a defining characteristic of ArcGIS Enterprise as a whole, not just image server, but that ability to connect directly to your data in place, wherever it is. We've had that for many, many years, but it really is one of the defining characteristics that we see driving use of ArcGIS Enterprise by many customers. Whether it's a more traditional geodatabase, an RDBMS like Oracle, SQL Server, but also more recently cloud data warehouses, data lakes of different kinds, cloud storage like Bodewin just showed for imagery or other things, the ability to connect to external to ArcGIS data sources of your choice. And in many cases, putting the software right next to that data to make sure that there's as good performance as you can get, there's very low latency. Contrast that with ArcGIS Online, where the data inherently has to be within the ArcGIS Online environment to be able to be used for analysis and visualization purposes. You saw some examples in the form of data pipelines during the demos both yesterday and today, where those are techniques or new applications to be able to bring the data in With ArcGIS Enterprise, you have some flexibility in terms of either bringing data in, that's still an option, or simply letting the data be in place and connecting directly to it. So there's a lot of value in that, and we see that being used for a lot of really good integration purposes. Going back to image server, over the past year, we've seen some enhancements on this exact topic, the ability to connect to cloud storage directly from within the Deep Learning Studio application that was introduced with Image Server here a couple of releases back. We've also enhanced the map viewer itself, the core map viewer within ArcGIS Enterprise, to be able to use some of those raster analysis tools, both enhance some of the ones that were there and introduced more. And then always popular performance improvements for good old-fashioned dynamic imagery layers. There we go. For Workflow Manager, which I mentioned just a little while ago, one of the big things that we worked on this past year was integrating Survey 123 into Workflow Manager, even in disconnected environments. That's a little bit niche in the sense of certainly not for everybody, but for those of you who might have that need, we had heard a lot of feedback on that one and are happy to have gotten that into the system. And then there's general productivity enhancements. Next one, ArcGIS Notebook Server. ArcGIS Notebooks generally are available in both ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise, and it forms the backbone of the ability to take Python code and not just run it as simple scripts, but actually put it into a notebook. It's a nice interactive experience that can then also be scheduled. For ArcGIS Notebooks with ArcGIS Enterprise, one of the big new things was that Notebook Server itself, so this is for those IT professionals who care about the individual components, where you can now run that under Docker Engine. So for the IT professionals who in some cases struggled with rules around what kinds of software you can run, we used to have a requirement for a different container engine. Now we have Docker Engine in there, which is free open source and is generally much more accessible to many of you. With ArcGIS Knowledge, I mentioned this one briefly yesterday, but it bears repeating. We've gone from a very desktop ArcGIS Pro-centric way of working with knowledge graphs, both in terms of authoring, but also in terms of querying. Now we've got Knowledge Studio. This is a web application that can be used to interrogate and extract data out of the knowledge graphs and making it much more accessible to everybody within your organization. So if you haven't yet looked at knowledge graphs and how they might fit into your workflows, potentially because it wasn't going to be available to very many people in the organization, this really is something we see as a way to break through that. Beyond that, there's the integration of things like arcade expressions. If you are not familiar with arcade, I don't know how you've managed to avoid it. Arcade is used all over the place within ArcGIS for many different kinds of purposes. But now within the knowledge graph realm, we can use arcade expressions to more efficiently load data. And then next up in the area of also imagery again, we've got ArcGIS Excalibur. This is another web application for working with imagery, and now not just static individual imagery, but also video. So it works very well with the video server that I talked about, which is about being able to say not just here's a video, but actually geo-referencing the video, very similar in spirit to oriented imagery. You can bring that into the ArcGIS Excalibur application. Video server itself also integrates now with Image Analyst and the new ArcGIS All Source application that was introduced a little bit over a year ago. I already did this one because I thought it made much more sense to do earlier.
Yeah, very good. I won't do it again.
We're gonna move past that one. I'll jump back ever so slightly here and talk about those enterprise releases. I already mentioned 11.2 and 11.3 and when they came out, but I wanted to touch on a topic that we often get questions about. In fact, I got some questions on this in a few meetings just earlier today. With ArcGIS Enterprise on Windows and Linux, We have a concept called short-term support releases and long-term support releases. And they're very self-descriptive things. Some of them are supported for a short amount of time, some of them are supported for a longer amount of time. We alternate between the two. So ArcGIS Enterprise 10.9.1 was a long-term support release. Then 11.0 came out and was a short-term support release. You can guess the cadence here. This is important because as an organization, when you choose to upgrade and what version you choose to upgrade to is often a very consequential decision. How many of you look forward to a software upgrade project? Yeah, see, nobody raised, oh, there's one person here. Generally, you want to get your work done, and upgrading software is not the part of the work that solves a problem, or at least not in terms of a GIS problem. What is really important to understand when you choose to do an upgrade, that you're upgrading to the right release for you and your organization. Short-term support releases have a total of 3 years worth of support, and out of those 3 years, 1.5 years receives functional patches and security updates. Means you have to be prepared to upgrade on a fairly regular cadence, right? You can't wait 2 years. Then you're out of the security patch window. So be aware of this concept if you're not already thinking about it when you're planning things. Luckily, ArcGIS Enterprise 11.3, which was released here just a few months ago, is the latest release and is a long-term support release. So if you're not already on 11.3 and you're wondering, where should I go? 11.3 is the answer. Very easy right now. Just go to 11.3. This is the summary of what I was just describing. The short-term releases, the long-term releases. This is on Windows and Linux. And if you're wondering, how do I find this information? I can't possibly remember this offhand all the time. That's okay. Go to support.esri.com, navigate to ArcGIS Enterprise, and you'll find the product lifecycle link right there. It gives you all these key dates. And if you ever need to convince somebody within your organization that it's time to start planning for an upgrade, show them this, find the right person who cares about security patches, and say, we're about to go into mature support. That should hopefully convince them. Related to this, you might have noticed that we went to 11, first of all, here not too long ago. And at the same time, we went from a ... version numbering model. Who here loves version numbers as much as I do? All right, a few people. It's a fun little topic. The important thing is simply know that with the 11X series, we only have one minor version number. No more 10, 9, 1, and so forth. 11.0, 11.1, 11.2, 11.3. Makes it a little bit easier. And then the even-numbered minor releases are short-term support in the Windows and Linux world, and the odd-numbered minor releases are long-term support. So if you do love version numbers as much as me, somebody wrote a blog on this once. You may want to give those to your colleagues who have questions on it. I certainly continue to get questions on this 2 years after I wrote the blog. So, good. Why did we go to ArcGIS Enterprise 11? Well, one of the key drivers was really the transition from ArcMap to ArcGIS Pro. How many, I'm not trying to shame anyone, but how many of you still use ArcMap actively for your day-to-day work? It's time. It's time. In the ArcGIS Enterprise world, the big thing was ArcGIS Enterprise 11.0 and beyond no longer supports publishing new services from ArcMap to ArcGIS Enterprise. That's really the major driver for the big version number change. So if you're not quite ready to let go of ArcMap yet, but you do want to prepare yourself for the future, ArcGIS Enterprise 10.9.1 is that sweet spot to go to. And then please make that transition to Pro, both for new work, but also to go through your older services that you may have published. You have the option of using both at 10.9.1, and then you can upgrade to 11x. I won't belabor this too much because we could spend an entire session on this. In fact, we have spent entire sessions on this at other conferences. If you have questions or you're curious about this and you haven't made this transition yet, just know that there's a lot of really good material. I may be biased, because my team wrote a lot of this material, but a lot of material on what this means, what to do, how to plan for it, and moving along. The product documentation itself is updated with every release with best practices. There's some QR codes here. Those considerations for upgrades, getting to the 11x series, again, if you're not already there, take that QR code, and I believe we're sharing these slides afterwards as well. So if you don't want to take a picture right now, don't worry, you can still get there. Lots of great material to review. More QR codes. Believe me, we want you to be successful in your upgrade to 11x if you're not already there. We really want to make sure that you are successful in terms of both the upgrade itself, but also migrating any content that you have. And I'm convinced that the Eagle team, I'm going to say that on their behalf, is equally interested in you being successful and want to help you if you have questions. So please reach out to them as well. All right, I've talked a lot. How about we get into some of the good stuff about what's new in the portal?
Yeah, and what I wanted to start off with is Esri released a new blog as a new interface for the blog, but it's really easy to find information about specific products. Yeah. So if you want to know what is new, always go to those blogs, because we can't be comprehensive here with everything that is new. But it's really good because some of those blogs also are a little bit of a deeper dive in some of the upgrades or updates there. So I just wanted to highlight that first before we go into what's new. And I wanted to start off with some of the bigger apps that are part of 11.3. So the first is Web Editor. If you were here in the previous version, or you have seen, thank you, the plenary, then you saw this app demonstrated, and it's a streamlined way to be able to manage your data, and it comes with 11.3, so that's a real good reason to maybe think of upgrading to 11.3 if you're not on there yet. Then another app is that we've seen in the plenary as well is ArcGIS GeoBIM, and that is to connect that BIM world to our GIS world through our relationship with Autodesk. That used to be only available in ArcGIS Online, but it's there in 11.3 as well. And the same goes for ArcGIS Urban. And ArcGIS Urban is being used to create those scenarios for planning developments, see the outcomes of certain developments. And that app now is also part of ArcGIS Enterprise. So next I want to jump into some of the more specific areas of ArcGIS Enterprise, and I want to start off with the mapping and visualization and the analysis side of it. So basically, where most of the actual work, actual mapping is being done. And the map viewer is usually your go-to place. So if you're coming from an older version where you still have the classic map viewer, then you'll see that the map viewer in itself is completely refreshed. And a couple of things that are new in this release are the support for some extra fields. So the date-only field and the time-only field, great for things like birthdays that only need a year, or opening hours for businesses that only need a time. Also the timestamp offset. So it's basically the way that you can store time information. Because usually before it would be stored as an epoch code, so just a code, and it wouldn't be aware of a time zone. So if you want to do some analysis over multiple time zones, for example, traffic counts between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. in the traffic over multiple time zones, it's really hard to identify for each feature in what time zone it is. But now you can store that information with the feature, and it's much easier to do that analysis, for example, across different time zones in the Pacific. Another one is the big integer. So that's just being able to store larger numbers. We'll support it in MapViewer now. Staying with time, Philip is in the US. I'm in Australia. Say we want to look at a map for New Zealand and events happening at a specific time. It can be real useful to set the web map to the New Zealand time zone if that is the topic that we're looking at. So that is now possible with the map viewer. You can either choose a time or set it to the time of the data. And you can also see what time zone is actually being used by a little widget that's sitting on the right side of the map. Another improvement is the way that you can work with related records. So you can configure them and view them in the pop-ups. And what is great is that this capability works for hosted features layers, but also for the reference feature layers, and also feature layers that are part of a map surface or a map image surface. New item types, and there's two that have been introduced. The first one is the group layer, and that's actually a really interesting new item type. That means that you can group layers that you've published that are in your enterprise, add them to a group in the map viewer, and you can then save that as an item. So you can now reuse that groupage of layers again and again in new maps, and you can easily share that with someone else as well. And a layer that was introduced is the media layer. Media layer allows you to add that PNG or JPEG from an historic map, for example. In the map, you can geo-reference it in the map viewer. You can then save that information with the layer. But what you can do now as well is, because that item type is there, you can save that layer. So again, you can reuse it in other maps. You can share it with other people in the organization, and they don't have to add an image again and then geo-reference it again. So for style options from ArcGIS Pro, you can upload styles. And those styles you can search and find when you're selecting symbols. And that makes it a lot easier. If your organization has a specific set of symbols for something, you don't have to find that one symbol in your folder somewhere. You can just use the item, the style item in ArcGIS Online that has all the symbols, and you can then select from it. And as well with this update are some more options for the color ramps. A new chart type being introduced, the box plot chart type that you can add, and just like with the so what you can do as well is that it can come from feature layers in a map surface, which is really cool. So it doesn't have to be a feature layer; it can be a map surface, and the layers in there can be used for this chart. Now I want to go to a bit more of the analysis side. So the whole user interface for analysis has been updated with the new map viewer. It gives you multiple options as well. So you've got a history, you can rerun a tool. You can see the messages from the results for a tool that has run. And more analysis tools are being added. And there's feature analysis tools and raster analysis tools, and some of them that have been added that you may know from ArcGIS Pro, for example, are the derived stream as a line or the derived stream as a raster. But also things like being able to detect change using deep learning. What you can now also do is use the map surfaces and the layers in there as an input for your analysis. And for sometimes you want to do an ad hoc analysis of an area. For example, you want to do the features within an area without having that feature that specifies the area. So you can now draw it in the map, and it will use that as an input to your analysis. And then about custom tools. So a custom web tool that are geoprocessing workflows. So that can be models or scripts or notebooks, and they are published to and hosted in ArcGIS Enterprise. And what you can now do is, in the map viewer, is you can find those tools when you're running an analysis, and then use them from the analysis pane and run the analysis from there. Now tilting the map a little bit, so we're in 3D, and that's our scene viewer. So new to that is, and you heard it before, is the new 3D base maps with buildings and trees from OpenStreetMap, but also from other sources. And a real interesting one is that you can now modify an integrated mesh. So as you can see in the image here, you can cut out an area, you can clip it out, or you can replace it, or you can mask a specific area. And that is really great for those workflows where you've got a mesh of the whole city, but you've got some high quality BIM buildings and maybe some other derived buildings that you want to replace it with. So you can cut out a specific area, either highlight it, or mask it out, and then put your high definition building in its place. So going to some of the apps, ArcGIS Story Maps are part of ArcGIS Enterprise. So you can build very compelling stories using the maps that you have created in ArcGIS Enterprise. New is the briefings one. So you may have seen it a couple of times. It's really good tool for presentations where you can put the map at the center of it, or use images or videos. It says some new functionality, so that's new functionalities to briefing in general. It's all new here, and that's you can autoplay it. You can dock pop-ups, and there's some more functionality in there as well. We've also heard a lot about ArcGIS Hub as a way to share information. So within ArcGIS Enterprise, you've got ArcGIS Enterprise sites where you can build very specific websites for that could be departments or teams that as they access the enterprise, they actually see the data and the layers and the applications that are important to them. So you can create a unique entry point to each individual or each team to the ArcGIS Enterprise. Then we're going to talk a little bit about ArcGIS organization and administration, and in the room here, who is actually administering their ArcGIS Enterprise? Yeah, so improvements there are probably very important. So I want to highlight a few. One is, as the lead of the content team at Eagle, important to me, and that is being able to refresh Living Atlas content. So it's called Living Atlas, and that is because it's a living thing. There's layers and maps and apps being added continuously. Previously, you would need to upgrade your ArcGIS Enterprise to make use of the latest layers. Now you will be able to add packages to Living Atlas with updates, and you can even set them to schedule to be updated at a specific time once when it's available. So from an Eagle and from a New Zealand perspective, we'll be looking at how we can best use that for all the content that we are publishing, but also you are publishing to Living Atlas. The leading users can sometimes be a little bit of a struggle because they have content and groups. What has been added now is that when you're bulk deleting users of your portal, you can actually transfer their data in one go to another user that can hold that information, making that a bit easier. Printing is also an important one, so being able to designate a group that has all the layouts for your printing templates, and then using the print surface to use that group that specifies all the print layouts. Being easily able to add and remove layouts from that group, so you can easier manage that print surface and the outputs that it can create. So a little bit about content and data management. If you were here in the previous session, you would have seen that that there's a new metadata editor in ArcGIS Online. It's also in ArcGIS Enterprise. It's already important, and we see that it's becoming actually more important to keep track of metadata. Metadata has always been important, but now that we see more AI in ArcGIS coming, what it relies on is the data, but also the metadata to be able to find the right data set. So just making it easier to manage that metadata is really important in that space as well. Another thing that is happening is that people who've been using ArcGIS Enterprise or even ArcGIS Server for a while know that you can go to the server manager to manage certain settings of your services. So more and more of that functionality is actually coming to the portal. So you don't have to leave the portal. You don't have to go to that manager interface. So for map services, you can now enable certain options from the portal, which makes life just a little bit easier. So when I show the data stores, what you can do with one of those data stores is, for example, bulk publish the layers that are within it. What you can do now is that you can schedule updates to those data stores. So if you're publishing feature layers from a data store, you can now set a schedule, so you're always using the latest data that it's connected to. Another one is if you use your vector tile layers to visualize maybe your feature layers that are real complex, and you just want to have a faster performing vector layer, is that you can now automatically update the vector tile layers that are based off of a feature layer. And those are some of the new capabilities. Like I said, we can't be comprehensive. We can't cover it all, but I hope that there was something in it for all of you that, I don't know, makes it worthwhile to at least investigate the options to move to 11.3. And with that, I want to give it back to you.
All right, thank you. Yeah, like Bodwin just said, we could literally spend an entire day, if not an entire week, on all the individual pieces. So we had to do a whirlwind tour. We really do hope that some of this resonated with you, whether you're an IT professional, an end user, content or user administrator, or all of the above. What I wanted to talk about now was a little bit about ArcGIS Enterprise on Kubernetes, which is, like I mentioned at the beginning, something we introduced here a couple of years ago. The first thing that we often get asked when somebody first hears about Enterprise on Kubernetes is, well, is this yet another new product? And the answer is both yes and no. But from a very foundational perspective, it is just ArcGIS Enterprise. It's a new deployment option for ArcGIS Enterprise. So it sits next to the Windows and Linux deployment options. It's a new deployment option that's built on top of Kubernetes, which is itself what we call an orchestration platform for containerized software. So in terms of the persona that we had in mind when we were building this new deployment option, it very much wasn't the end users. For the end users, this is just ArcGIS Enterprise with the same applications and so forth. This is for the IT professionals, for the people, those of you whose responsibility it is to install and keep the software up and running. It's built on those cloud-native principles, which means it comes with a number of benefits. I like the bullet we put on here, which is once it's up and running, administration is easy. Easy if you know how to run Kubernetes-based software, that is. So there are nuances to this. But the point being, with ArcGIS Enterprise on Windows and Linux, especially for the bigger and more complex deployments, there can be a lot of moving parts. A server here, a portal there, a data store there, maybe multiple servers, maybe high availability setups. There can be an enormous amount of things that just continues to grow, and all of it has to be wired up together so that the individual pieces can talk to each other. When you do need to perform upgrades, you need to do it in the right order for all the right bits and pieces. Those are the kinds of challenges that ArcGIS Enterprise on Kubernetes is built to try to tackle. Because it's much faster to upgrade. The upgrade process for Enterprise on Kubernetes is literally clicking a button that says upgrade, and then walking away for 15 minutes while the software performs that upgrade for you with minimal downtime as it tries to ensure that end users don't see anything going on beyond a new and refreshed system a little while later. Inherently, it is resilient and comes with high availability characteristics. It is no longer an intentional choice to say, do you want to set up a highly available system or not? The question is, how many resources do you want to dedicate to high availability? And then it becomes a question of how many resources are you willing to pay for in terms of infrastructure? You get a high availability type of system simply by setting up the software. It can scale in a completely different way than on Windows and Linux, and then it can be cost effective, and by that we mean not only can it scale up very quickly, it can also scale back down very quickly when the load goes off the system. So these are all IT challenges that we're trying to solve, making it easier to both architect but also install and then maintain the system. So if that resonates with you, well, I have those problems. I want to figure that out. Then some of these other challenges may equally resonate. You've seen an increase in the amount of administrative work you have to do on the IT side. It's hard or difficult or slow for you to procure new infrastructure, new hardware, whether that's literally on premises or even if it's in a cloud environment. Or you have too much infrastructure for the day-to-day, but you feel like you have to have it in place in case there is a surge in demand. You have to be over-prepared. Or you have that complex architecture that I was describing. These are the kinds of challenges that we hear from customers that are potentially candidates for using ArcGIS Enterprise on Kubernetes. So to contrast that, this was the picture I showed earlier of the components for ArcGIS Enterprise on Windows and Linux. Right? You've got these very large monolithic components, ArcGIS Data Store, ArcGIS Server, Portal for ArcGIS, with with ArcGIS Enterprise on Kubernetes, it's a very different view, and apparently it didn't include that view, but it's broken down into a number of small components. I think we have more than 40 individual containers, if you're into the IT side of things, within the system. And at first glance, or when you hear that number, that might sound far more complex. At least there's only 3 or 4, depending on how we count up here. The point is, the system orchestrates all those individual bits and pieces, and the system knows how to scale them up and down when needed. You have control over how many resources dedicate, but you no longer have to manage these things. There is no such thing as a portal for ArcGIS component. There's just ArcGIS Enterprise that consists of a number of individual pieces. So ArcGIS Enterprise on Kubernetes sounds amazing. Who here doesn't want to solve all those problems? And if I'm standing here on the stage saying we've got a great new deployment option, well, shouldn't everybody be jumping at that right now? And I just made the eagle people in the crowd really nervous by phrasing it like that. The answer is no. ArcGIS Enterprise on Kubernetes is not for everyone, because it does come with a large, and I almost said unspoken, but I'm going to say it out loud, implicit set of requirements, which is your organization has to be ready for it. Ready for being able to manage Kubernetes, being able to take the software and not just install it, but also maintain it over time. And all of us have been working with Windows and or Linux for probably decades in some form or another. If you haven't already worked with Kubernetes and other cloud-native systems like that, you shouldn't jump in and do ArcGIS Enterprise Kubernetes as the first one. Right? There is a maturity process that you have to go through and a skill set that you have to have available within your organization or a partner or somebody like Eagle to help you on your behalf. So it's very, very alluring. The types of problems it solves are real, and the benefits, if you get there, are massive. But getting there is itself a journey. So if that at all resonates with you, again, I would really encourage you to talk to your contacts at Eagle. They can help you. New Zealand actually has some of the very best examples of ArcGIS Enterprise on Kubernetes customers. So you're privileged. You have a very strong distributor and peers within the industry who've already done this, and hopefully you can learn from them. As part of this kind of thinking of what is the strategy I need to pursue on the IT side of things, what are the best practices, how do I go about having these conversations with my IT organization, whether you are yourself part of the IT organization or sitting next to them, talking to those colleagues of yours who don't work with GIS on a daily basis, who doesn't know what ArcGIS is. How do you have those conversations about the requirements, the needs for IT infrastructure, for network settings, for configuration, for SaaS versus software, and how to make them work together? That's why we built the ArcGIS well-architected framework and the architecture center that hosts it, to have those kinds of resources available for you to be able to take to the rest of your organization. I think it's no secret that Esri product documentation has historically and traditionally, intentionally been written in a way to be very accessible to a GIS audience. Sometimes that meant, or oftentimes that meant, we created new words and terms for IT concepts that already existed in the industry, because we were trying to talk to a GIS audience. We've heard over the past many years that was great, that worked, but it made it that much harder to then actually talk to the IT side of your organizations when GIS was no longer something sitting on the outside. Why do we call it a web adapter when it's just a reverse proxy? Right? Why did we invent that term? Well, because we needed to explain it to a different audience. The well-architected framework is very intentionally written from the ground up to use standard IT terminology, to make that conversation easier and to help bridge the IT side with the GIS side of things. So we really hope that it will meet that need. We're very interested in feedback. If you haven't already checked it out, please do go and read at least the introductory sections. I won't ask you to read everything from end to end, but there's a lot of great content on there. Some of my most favorite and most experienced colleagues across all of Esri, from professional services to the product teams to our solution engineers on the sales side, have all contributed to really make this the best possible resource that we can. And we're continuing to build this out. We continue to work on new material to put in there. All right. That was a transition also off the Kubernetes topic, because having that conversation about whether to pursue ArcGIS Enterprise on Kubernetes or not is part of that kind of conversation. It's part of the introduction to what are the best practices, what are the problems you're trying to solve, and making sure that that's put into context. So to round out the ArcGIS Enterprise on Kubernetes topic more broadly, one thing that's new with the 11.3 release was the introduction of raster analytics. So this is functionality we've actually had on the Windows and Linux side for many years, but we saw relatively little usage of because it was so difficult to set up the required infrastructure that only the most motivated of customers were really willing to invest what it took. Setting up hundreds of machines potentially to analyze or process billions and trillions of pixels is not really anybody's idea of a very good time. Even in a cloud environment, spinning up 100 VMs takes a lot of time. With the introduction of raster analytics on Kubernetes, we finally have the kind of environment where it becomes much easier. You basically just tell the system, please spin up all these things, and it does it for you under the hood. And once it's done, it spins it back down. So you really can make use of that orchestration capability of Kubernetes itself. Some other things that we've done on the Kubernetes side is getting more into feature parity with Windows and Linux. There's some things that we didn't have support for within Kubernetes that we now do. Cloud Native Object Store is on the administrative side, but SOE and SOI support. These are some of those kinds of extensions you can create. But then we also continue to add support for new Kubernetes environments themselves. So we've supported AKS on Microsoft Azure, EKS on AWS, GKE on Google Cloud. We've added support for some new environments in the non-cloud side of things. So we've had support for Red Hat OpenShift and now we're also supporting some additional ones that are popular in different pockets of the world. All right, and I think I nailed the timing more or less. I was trying to see if I could hit 10 minutes. We have about 10 minutes left. Hopefully you've been submitting some good questions on Slido, and Andrew's going to come up and help us navigate that.
I've got a few already. I looked at some of the slides and the questions
cheated.
that come out. So my idea is that I ask a question to you, and you come up with the answer. We can work together on it. I just want to say there were a couple of questions that are a bit more specific to a specific environment. Feel free to come to talk to us about those after the session, or talk to our tech support team. What I try to do is try to get some of those questions that that many people may have. So to start off with is, if Enterprise has almost everything that ArcGIS Online have and have greater flexibility, why choose online? Why does not just replace Enterprise Online with Enterprise?
So I take exception with the concept of Enterprise having almost the same capabilities as online or vice versa. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that because I think it's a great topic. We often get that statement I said thrown at us. It's like, why doesn't ArcGIS Enterprise have all the same things as an ArcGIS Online? Well, they're closely related, but they're not identical. The primary driver of when something is available in online is typically on the website, the web applications, there's something new, and that's driven by the release cadence. We don't build a web application for online or enterprise. We build a web application, but online releases on a more rapid basis. Online releases 3 times per year, enterprise twice a year. And then once ArcGIS Enterprise releases, it's up to you guys to actually decide when you upgrade. Right, if you're on 10.9.1, there's 4-ish, 3 years worth of updates that you haven't gotten yet. So from your perspective, ArcGIS Enterprise may feel massively out of date. Well, part of that was when was it released, but part of it also when you update. So it's a little bit of a misnomer, but to actually answer the question and not just riff on what I want to talk about. With ArcGIS Online, there's no infrastructure for you to manage. There's no upgrades to plan for. SaaS is incredibly compelling for a wide variety of use cases because it is that much easier, both to get started but also on an ongoing basis. You simply have new applications or new versions of applications available to you 3 times per year. I think pretty much everyone would want SaaS first if it met all their other requirements. What ArcGIS Enterprise provides is the ability to meet some of the more advanced requirements that may not be possible to meet with a SaaS environment like ArcGIS Online. Do you need to connect to those external data sources? Great, well, that's one of the things that is unique to ArcGIS Enterprise. Do you need to run the software? Does your data have to be within the boundaries of, let's say, New Zealand? You have data sovereignty requirements. A SaaS is not going to meet those kinds of requirements. So the question becomes, well, do I then just not use ArcGIS Online at all and just go fully with ArcGIS Enterprise? That can be one answer. Right? That's not a wrong answer, but it really depends on your needs. What we have found, and like I mentioned earlier, a growing majority of customers have found value in using both. Using ArcGIS Enterprise to solve some of the problems that probably only ArcGIS Enterprise can, and then using ArcGIS Online for other problems that ArcGIS Enterprise may be able to technically do, but it's not as easy or convenient. That, I think, is one of the things that drives the common pattern of using ArcGIS Online for public-facing workflows and ArcGIS Enterprise for internal-facing workflows. Because if you're pushing something out to the general public, scaling a system on your own to meet the potential large demand that can come out of that is really not that fun. And ArcGIS Online is really, really good at it. So using the right system to solve the right problems is always important. And sometimes that means using one or the other, sometimes it means using both. It really depends on your organization and your problems. Very long-winded answer to what sounds like a simple question.
Yeah, we've still got time for a few more.
Good.
Maybe just one more if these are the answers. But
Yeah.
no, it's really good to hear that. So one question is also, and maybe that is related to the well-architected framework that is out there now, is how enterprise manages resources for portal, server, and image analysis, and if that wouldn't exhaust resources if you're running image analysis on your enterprise.
Not sure I follow the question.
So there's the question is you've got enterprise and you've got portal servers and image server on there. How does enterprise manage it? Because wouldn't it exhaust it if you're running, I don't know, big analytics there?
So that's a great example of, well, with ArcGIS Enterprise, it's up to you to come up with the proper architecture to solve that particular problem. And in the ArcGIS Enterprise world, we talk about workload separation, right? You've got all these individual different components and you're running all these different processes. For a system like that, you probably wouldn't run that on a single VM, no matter how big that VM is. You probably want to isolate certain things off from each other. And then specifically with something like image processing or raster analytics, it's about dedicating and providing the right infrastructure to run that analysis over here and not have that interfere with the portal or the servers or the data stores, all the other components. But that becomes an architecture challenge to begin with, then it becomes an implementation challenge, and then it becomes a maintenance challenge. Or you could use ArcGIS image dedicated in online and it just happens. The cost comes elsewhere. Depends on where you want to put your resources.
Thank you. Another question is about the server roles, so whether they are included with ArcGIS Enterprise or additional products.
So we talk about the base ArcGIS Enterprise deployment, which is what forms the core of ArcGIS Enterprise, and for most people, that is ArcGIS Enterprise. And that consists of a certain number of components, the ArcGIS server component, the portal for ArcGIS component, ArcGIS data store. And then there's these additional, what we talk about as our additional server roles. They're typically not included, but at the end of the day, that's also a business thing. It depends on what kind of EA you may or may not have. That's really a conversation for you and your account manager to talk about what you may have access to.
Got time for maybe one or two more. So one question, and it was about what I showed with being able to create an image service from a data store, whether you can add an extra image to an existing image service there. Correct me if I'm wrong there. I believe that functionality isn't quite there yet. There are ways with the Python API. However, with ArcGIS Enterprise and ArcGIS Pro, you do have more flexibility when you use a Mosaic dataset as the source, and then publish it up to a image as an image service in ArcGIS Enterprise. You can then use that Mosaic dataset to update, refresh the images that will then be reflected on the image server side as well. And then the print template the print template groups got a question as well, and it was actually being covered in the ArcGIS Online version, and I think it's a big thing. So the question is, don't we have to then have custom print services to use custom print templates anymore? So what I understand is you do, and that's great. So I think it's in beta now in ArcGIS Online.
Yes.
So we've got these print layouts as an item that you can publish from ArcGIS Pro that you can then add to a group, and you can use that group for your print service. So that print service will use that group to then define the layout of the map.
Yep, that's right.
That's what I've got here. We are 10 seconds to ending this meeting. So thank you very much for coming. Again, if you have any questions, we'll be here. We'll be here for the dinner as well. Maybe slightly harder to find and recognize. But if you can find us, always feel free to ask us any questions about this topic. Is there anything you want to close on?
No, thank you all for coming. We hope we have given you something to think about, some information you can take home and use. And I hope you have had a great conference, and I hope you have a great dinner tonight.
Thank you, and thank you for coming.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so if we could all vacate. We are needing to set up this room for the gala dinner tonight, so if you do have any further questions, try and grab one of us shortly.